Let me share my screen with you all. Okay. So I hope everyone can see that. I am without a moderator today, as I mentioned, so I put my information in the chat. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and I will get to them as I can, or probably more likely afterwards. I do have a PowerPoint presentation, so if you want to see what's going on, you can see, but I will discuss everything that's on the PowerPoint. I do plan on recording. I'm recording now, so I do plan on putting that up on YouTube when I'm finished so that anybody who wanted to hear it and couldn't make it today has the ability to do that. So welcome, everybody. I am here to talk about Playtime, and some of you are more familiar with others. And pre-fitness, this concept of pre-fitness, and what are these two things and why do we need them? Let's see. First of all, I want to say that details matter. Jimmy Johnson kind of said it best. The difference between ordinary and extraordinary is that little extra. To be good is fine, but to be great takes just that little bit extra. So the details matter to me, and they matter to me in my practice as a physical therapist, and they matter to me in life. And I think that that's the foundation of Playtime. So my adventure, I'm nicknamed the OCD physical therapist. It was out of love from a colleague and a boss, because of my detail orientation and obsession with those details. I started out at the University of Toledo in the pre-physical therapy program. I went to Stony Brook University and got my bachelor's in physical therapy. And about 10 years into my bachelor's, I realized now that they're graduating doctoral students, I needed to do something to keep up with the times and get some information going and more updated things. So I had two choices, a doctorate degree or a clinical fellowship. I'm a clinician by heart. I love treating patients. I love figuring out problems. So I opted for the clinical fellowship in movement system impairments. This is where the OCD PT sort of stemmed from. A few years into that practice, as we realized that by attacking the details, people that I met with and helped them overcome their injuries wanted to suddenly they were interested in getting fit. They wanted to know who they could contact as a personal trainer and how they can start getting into the fitness, their fitness journey. So I was in the middle of talking to several personal trainers and coaches and all things like that. And I thought, I need to speak their language. I need to understand what their training is and dabble into this strength training side of things. So I got my certified strength and conditioning specialist license, and that served me well in being able to hold those conversations. But I'm still a clinician by trade, and my detail orientation has gone from movement system impairments to now Schroth scoliosis certification. So clinically, I'm a spine specialist, and I figure out all the details that nobody else seems to be able to figure out. So maybe some of you have heard about a physical therapist and what they do. Everybody's seen rock tape and physio balls. We know that physical therapists are obsessed with posture and positioning. In the medical world and amongst our own profession, we consider ourselves movement specialists. We diagnose movement imbalances. We figure out what things are contributing to those movement imbalances, and why are they causing this problem. A group of us work with various populations, rehab people post-surgery, we work on pain issues, work with strokes, brain injuries, that kinds of thing. But in the outpatient setting where I am, I like to explain this to my patients as we're part doctor because we have to diagnose these problems and figure out what's going on. We're part personal trainer because we use exercise to apply corrections to these problems. We're part chiropractor because we are concerned with alignment, and we are concerned with making sure that all the joints and spine are aligned. And we sometimes use manipulation in order to get those alignments. And we're part massage therapist because we do use soft tissue techniques like cupping or massage or what have you in order to address these movement impairments. In my experience, I've seen these trends for injuries in my practice. When I first started, it was people that are in their 50s and 60s that are having severe spine problems, having joint replacements, having spinal fusion surgeries, rotator cuff surgeries, things of that nature. And as we dove into why they were having these issues, if they were not from an injury per se, they just sort of gradually came on over the years. And, you know, the stories are, I've just bent over to pick up a tissue and my back went out. These are things that were leading to a problem for years building up to this situation. And once we identified the movement imbalance or the problem that was causing that, they said, man, I just wish I would have known this when I was younger. It just seems ridiculous to me that I should have known this. So they started asking, what about my daughter? What about my son? What about my grandson or granddaughter that moves funny or moves like me? What do I do there? And the wheel started turning. And the thought process for Playtime started to develop in my brain. But it wasn't until this young man who was an elite soccer player with a mystery foot injury showed up to my clinic that I thought, okay, I've got to do something about this. So he's 17. He has been playing soccer since he was a little tyke and had been playing on elite teams, and in 8 weeks was slated to go to international tryouts. And this young man had this mass on the top of his foot, kind of on the top of his left foot, outer edge of his left foot. And it would only come occasionally, and no doctors seemed to figure out what was going on. He'd been to several orthopedics, several family doctors. He'd had MRIs and CTs and x-rays. Everything was fine. No one could figure out what was going on. He went to an acupuncturist, and she was successful in helping reduce the pain and decrease the swelling, but it was transient. It didn't last. So she sent him to me and said, if anybody can figure it out, this crazy OCD PT can figure this out. So let's get you to her and see what's going on. So of course I examined him, and my exam was also negative. And I thought, oh gosh, what's the problem here? What's going on? And he's perfectly fit, perfectly flexible, and perfectly strong. And I thought, well, something's going on. There's a reason. So I had him stand up and say, let's go through your soccer drills. I'm not a soccer coach. I don't claim to be a soccer coach. I'm not going to try and give you advice against how you're practicing, and we'll talk to your coaches if we need to adjust anything. But let's just look at your drills and watch what happens. I'm an expert in movement. Let's see what's going on. So we went through his drills, and as he was going through his drills, one foot was kind of tipped in while the other foot was straight. And the agility was incredible. His footwork was insanely incredible and fast. So we had to video it and slow it down and all the things. But as we realized, that was the consistent factor, was that left foot was slightly turned in compared to the right foot. So I asked him, why are you doing that? And he said, I don't really know. Is there a reason? Like, is there a strategy to this? Has a coach advised you about this? And he says, no, really hasn't. I said, okay, well, just try and fix your foot. Just make it similar to the other side as you're going through these drills. So he did, and it slowed him down a little bit initially, but within a week he was able to practice that and make it a new habit. And lo and behold, the swelling went away. And his mom was elated and said, oh my gosh, this is wonderful. He's going to be able to make the audition or the tryouts in a couple of weeks. And sure enough, he did, and he made an England team, and he was just nothing short of ecstatic and never had a foot swelling problem again. So his mom came to me when she let me know that he was successful in making his the team that he wanted to make, and said, his sister's coming up right behind him, and I just want to make sure that she's not doing anything silly in the movement realm, and we can identify these little movement problems before they become a problem. Do you know of any classes or any people who are experts in this arena or have classes that we can sign her up for and teach this? I said, I really don't, but I'm going to make one. So that's how Playtime was founded. I've since lost track of the young man, so I'm not sure where he is these days, but I know he was playing soccer on that England team and was just nothing short of ecstatic about it. So people ask, what in the world is Playtime? And that's kind of what we're here for today. Playtime it's a play on PT, physical therapy. stands for Proprioceptive Learning Activities for Youth. So the first question I get is, what in the world is proprioception? It's a big, long medical word. The Webster Dictionary defines it as the recognizing the position, location, orientation, and movement of the body's muscles and joints. So in other words, to condense that down, it's understanding how your body moves. So in physical therapy, we have to sometimes teach a body how to identify what these movement patterns are before we can even correct a problem. So that's proprioception. As it turns out, proprioception is a sense in our body. So we all know that we have 5 senses: touch, taste, sight, smell, sound. But there have been recent discoveries in the last few years that we've discovered and proven in the studies that we have an additional 3 senses. One of those is proprioception, where our body is in space and what is it doing? What are our body's muscles and bones doing? We have the vestibular system. The vestibular system is the inner ear. It's if you're upside down, you know that you're upside down and you know you have to right yourself. And interoception, which is the language your internal organs speak to you. So is my heart rate fast? Do I need to urinate? Those types of things. The motor control and the learning part of this that comes with playtime and the learning piece is not only are we training people to recognize what that proprioceptive sense is and what is it telling us, but we're also having to make decisions about that. So for example, if you start to get a scratchy throat when you start to get a scratchy throat or a sore throat and you think, okay, what's happening here? Is it COVID? Do I need to do a COVID test and stay home, right? Is it allergies? Do I need to take an allergy pill? Or is it a cold and I need to take Zicam, vitamin C, drink lots of water, those kinds of things? We have to make these decisions based on what's happening in our body and what's going on. So if we feel our body moving in a certain way, we need to make a decision as to what we're doing about that movement. That's what playtime is all about. In doing this, and over the years as a physical therapist, I believe that there's a natural athlete and a developed athlete. So we've all worked with and seen natural athleticism, just beautiful movement right out the gate. And as a coach, as a person, it's just easy to turn those children and young adults that know naturally how to move their bodies and what they're doing. And it's easy to take them and refine those skills and make them a better athlete. But then you have the old story of Rudy, or someone who has that desire to be a good athlete, but they are unaware of their proprioceptive sense and they aren't sure how to use their bodies and how to do that. So for example, one of my success stories with Playtime is a girl named Zoe. She's 11. Maybe you've seen me post about her on social media. She is not a natural athlete, but her desire and competitive spirit is up there with all the rest of them. Her mom's a cross-country coach and a personal trainer, and kind of made Zoe run at the age of 9 because she knew Zoe had extra energy pent up and needed to have that release. So mom made Zoe run and became the coach so that she could help her. 2 years into running, Zoe hated it. 1 mile run, Zoe was just miserable. She hated running. It was a chore for mom to make her go every time. And so she was in her final year, entering her final year of cross country at the 1 mile level. And mom said, okay, this can be your final year. We've been battling this for a few years now, and this will be your final year if you really want it to be. But let's sign up for Playtime and see if we can help you out. So Zoe comes to Playtime and realizes that she didn't know how to perceive when her trunk was stable versus when her trunk wasn't stable. And mom said, her run is just awkward, clumsy, labored. It just looks funny. So Zoe learned that she didn't know how to use her abdominal muscles, and she was using her neck in compensation of her abdominal muscles. Once she learned how to use her abdominal muscles, that girl's thrilled to pieces that she could figure out how to use her abdominal muscles and how she could really hold herself stable and understand that sensation. So just being able to interpret that sensation of what abdominal muscles are supposed to feel like without having the neck as a compensatory factor, she was just thrilled and could hold a plank and could do a sit-up. So from a Monday to a Thursday, in the same week, her profound improvement was insane. It had nothing to do with strength. It had nothing to do with agility or growth. It was simply that she realized how to use her body and how to maximize what her body was doing. So her mom, as the coach and the trainer, was able to pull that into her running style, cue her into using that when she was running. And so that was in mid-July. And in the beginning of September, Zoe dropped her mile run from a 9-minute mile down to a 7-minute, 14-second mile. That's not from growth. That's not from anything tremendously extravagant. That's just from being aware of her body. So Zoe was thrilled. Who wouldn't be when you drop that much time in your run? She was excited. More importantly, when we were interviewing her and asking her questions about, how does she feel running? She's like, my back doesn't hurt. And her mom and I both look at her and said, we didn't even know your back hurt with running. She goes, well, I just thought backs hurt with running. That's just what happens, right? No, Zoe, that's not what's supposed to happen. Your back's not supposed to hurt with running. So then a couple weeks later, she has more success stories and she's starting to be confident and comfortable. And she looks at her mom and says, I don't think I want to quit cross country this year. I want to do it again next year. And mom says, whoa, wait a minute. But cross country is 2 miles next year. And she's like, that's okay. I feel like I can do it now. So we took Zoe, my big important piece to this is we took Zoe from being a person who wanted to quit and hated doing it to being able to recognize these symptoms that her body was giving her and these sensations that her body was giving her. And she was able to then maximize her performance in her cross-country run. So we turned her into a developed athlete. So our mission for Playtime is we teach the sense of proprioception. It's not alone. It has to be combined with training and coaching to help develop people into fit individuals at any age that can maximize their performance and prevent injuries by understanding how their body moves. So that's what Playtime's all about. And that's why I believe it needs to be a pre-fitness scenario in many cases. Even if a person's a natural athlete, they still learn something about their bodies and how to interpret those sensations when they go through the program. So having this as a foundational level pre-fitness, pre-sport in their conditioning program is huge. I'm big on prevention. So I feel like this program is something that we need to bring into children and adolescents, or maybe even adults, as a prevention program. We all know movement has its benefits. We'll get to that in just a second. But this cartoon sums it up. To prevent a heart attack, take an aspirin every day. Take it out for a run, take it to the gym, take it for a bike ride. It's not the aspirin that's going to help you. It's the moving around that's going to help you in many cases, more so than that aspirin. So understanding the importance of the movement and how your body can function so that you can do those things is really important. I'm preaching to the choir here. I know some of you are, coaches and trainers, and I'm preaching to the choir in that sense. But the benefits of movement are many, and there are studies to prove it all over the place. 33,000 scientific articles on the topic of exercise and confirming how valuable it is and how we really need it as a sort of medicine. But it improves circulation, it improves digestion. Its prevention in osteoporosis is huge, especially starting during adolescence. Strength training creates bone growth. It improves confidence, decreases stress, anxiety, depression. And as a result, it improves classroom behavior and academic performance. There have been MRI studies proving that after exercise, the brain is just lit up with blood flow and activity and ready to learn. And multiple studies have shown that the learning that occurs after a bout of exercise is so profound and important. And that exercise increases cortical brain mass, improves memory, all these things. And these studies prove this time and again. Sadly, though, our scales are tipping. We're moving less. we have less physical education. We have less free play. We have less playing, less movement, and we're having greater medical issues. So not only obesity, but we're having pain problems in young people. I have 10-year-olds that have sciatica for 2 years and have been seeing a chiropractor, and I'll show you a picture of him in a little bit. I have heart problems, patients that have heart problems and diabetes. So you have other pain problems and orthopedic problems that require lots of medications and maybe even surgery, injections, all these things. And it's just tipping. The scales are tipping. And it's a multifaceted reason why, but let's dive into that a bit. With my two hats, I have two perspectives on movement. I have the medical perspective on movement and the fitness perspective on movement. So we're going to go into fitness first. Obesity is a common discussion. It's a result of inactivity. We all know that. The basic bottom line to obesity is if we take in and ingest more energy than what we use, we're going to have weight problems. If we're not very active, we don't need that many calories in order for our bodies to function. But if we're active, we need to make sure we have adequate amount of calories in order to make our bodies work. Many times the solution, especially for kids, is get off the video games. You need to move, just go outside and play. However, that doesn't really happen in reality anymore. I don't know if anybody's known this, but many of us grew up playing outside. I think my generation, the start of my generation was when the start of the culture shift started to happen, like at the late 90s. Many people grew up playing outside. We would eat breakfast at home and mom would say, go outside, go play in the neighborhood and come back for lunch and come back when the street lights are on, or if you need anything, I'm around, but just get out of here, go play. That doesn't really happen anymore. But why are these people obese and less fit? We're going to get into why it doesn't happen anymore here in a second, but we obviously have poor eating habits, right? Everything is easy and quick versus a substantial amount of food. And when you go through a drive-through, not always are there vegetable and fruit options. Technology, of course, people spend a lot of time on technology, whether it's video games, phones, computers. Even kids and adults have sleep problems. When you have sleep problems, your body wants to take in more calories because you don't have enough fuel to get through your day. Your body didn't have a chance to recover. So you take in more fuel and more food during the day because you didn't sleep well at night. Why aren't we sleeping well at night? Let's get to the root of that problem. Some medications cause us to gain weight or have us increase our appetite. PE is becoming, physical education is becoming less dominant in schools. It's happening less. And some schools have even eliminated their physical education programs altogether. And I believe it's starting in middle school where children can opt out of PE under various circumstances. And they're legit opting out of PE in many instances. So going back to that playing outside thought process, we used to have this go outside and play, moms and dads kicked us out of the house thought process, and that slowly dwindled over the years due to many circumstances. But now we have play dates and it's organized play, right? That outdoor free play doesn't really exist anymore. Why? Why isn't that happening? Why are we only doing organized play these days? Organized play dates, organized sports. That seems to be the only time that people are getting activity. I think it's multifaceted, and I think we had a culture shift that happened under our noses and we didn't even realize it until we're looking back on it now. And many studies are proving the same thing. We now have 2 working parents. And we don't know our neighbors and we don't know the neighborhood around us. So it's safer and easier to have the kids not wander the neighborhood and come inside and be safe. Let's not break a bone. Let's not do anything that could be, dangerous and get you abducted or, crazy things happen with the world out there these days. So because we don't know our neighbors and we have both working parents, we don't have that mom or dad that's home during the day that is a safe ground level place if you needed to go there. We have this fear of abduction and injury and more importantly, this fear of legal implications. I have a lake in my backyard, and the neighborhood kids, it's a private lake that several, houses are on it. But the kids in the neighborhood that don't live on the lake don't have access to this lake unless they know us. But, in the back of your head, you're fearful. Is this kid, if he's going to come over fishing or swimming, what happens if he gets hurt? What happens if he or she drowns? I'm liable for that injury to happen. And, those parents may not be even remotely reserved about suing me should something happen. So I'm very reluctant and very scared to have people coming over and swimming and fishing in the backyard for those legal implications. And then you have societal perceptions. We have a case in 2015 in Maryland, and it was an urban area. The quote, free range parents, right? I don't know. I don't have children, but lots of my friends do. And free range parents, I guess, get a bad rap. So this story pertains to this free range parent who they had 2 children. I believe they were 6 and 10 years old. These parents let these children by themselves walk through the city for 1 mile to go to a park that these kids like to play at. They felt comfortable with the kids doing that. They felt like they gave them all of the instruction that they needed to do that. And yet someone reported that these children were being neglected to authorities because there weren't parents around. So what happened was, through this process, the parents had to take this case all the way to the Supreme Court, where a judge finally ruled, listen, after talking to the kids, after talking to the parents, we realized that all appropriate safety factors were taken into consideration, and these kids are fine to walk to the park. We're going to dismiss this case. But these are the societal perceptions and things that are happening and limiting our outdoor free play. This legal implication, the fear, the not knowing our neighbors, the both working parents. So these kids that aren't in organized activities just aren't getting activity. It's not just about devices. So some of the statistics are only 24% of children that are ages 6 to 17 get the recommended 60 minutes of daily physical activity. That's not very good. And then we have more than 80% of adults and adolescents do not get enough physical activity. So we have childhood obesity and childhood diabetes and childhood cardiovascular issues and mental health issues, all stemming in part from this lack of physical activity. So I thought, gosh, is this just my observations? So going back to my practice, I have these 40-somethings and 30-somethings with these back problems and fusion surgeries and knee replacements at 35. And I thought, man, is this just my observation in Toledo, Ohio, or is this something that's happening somewhere else? And I was actually very shocked and surprised at the number of research articles that came up from all over the world about how children aren't as active as they used to be. And they're basing that measurement on fundamental movement skills. So we'll get into that for a second. But fundamental movement skills are things like jumping and running and catching and sliding and throwing and all of these things. So this particular study out of Australia done by Hardy is published in 2013. They surveyed over 13,000 children that ranged from the ages of 9 to 15. So we're talking middle school to early high school age children. And they studied them over the course of 13 years. So from 1997 to 2010. And at each survey point, these children, 50% of them or less, couldn't do any of these movements. Run, skip, or not skip, run, sprint, jump, catch, kick, and throw. They couldn't do these movements, just plain couldn't do them. So then I started looking at other researchers. Ireland, O'Brien found that 11% of kids ages 10 to 13 couldn't do any of these movements in 2016. And the studies are listed: UK, the Canadians, Netherlands, United States, all these places all over the world had the same similar things. When we're looking at children in middle school and early high school and their ability to complete fundamental movements such as running and skipping and throwing and catching and jumping, they couldn't do these things. So then the research said that these things are learned. They're not genetic. They're not an inherent movement. And typically these things are learned through physical education and play. And these things are learned by the age of 7 and refined from 10 to 13. So you're supposed to have a foundation for how these things are done by the age of 7 and refine them by the ages of 10 to 13. But if you get to the ages of 10 to 13 and you don't know how to do these things, are you going to be physically active? Common sense says no. If I can't catch a ball and a ball gets thrown at me, and if I can't catch it, it hits me in the face, or I have to keep running after it, it's embarrassing or it hurts, I'm not going to keep doing that. So I went to the research and said, okay, is this true? Is this what's happening? And sure enough, it's true. Children who do not have basic fundamental movements are not likely to participate in organized sports and play experiences because of a lack of basic skills. First of all, they're not going to make a team, which drags their confidence down, right? If their confidence gets dragged down, then they start having these mental health issues. But what McGrain found in 2017 was if they understood these fundamental movement skills and they had confidence in their performance, they were likely to be more physically active both early in life and later in life. Common sense, but these studies are proving that this common sense thing is really, truly happening. Logan proved that these skills need to be learned, practiced, and reinforced. So when a 1-year-old starts to walk, their gait's wide and clumsy and unbalanced, and they have to practice that. As toddlers and 3-year-olds, kids run all over the place. They run on rocks and grass, and they fall and they jump, and they don't really know how to jump yet, but they're running all over the place in every different direction, and they're clumsy, they fall. They don't really know how to refine that. So someone has to teach them. You start here, you stop here. How do you turn? How do you stay balanced? How do you do that? It's both experience in play and with instruction. So understanding that all these things have to be practiced in order to be learned and executed well is important. And that's where playtime comes in. If you don't understand how to move your body, if you don't understand what those symptoms are of telling you, you're not going to be able to do those things. And if we can change that, like in 11-year-old Zoe, where we improve abdominal function, and all we do is do that, and her run significantly improves, why not? Logan also proved that in that example with Playtime coming up with an intervention, if we create strategies to improve these children's physical performance, it happened. It truly happened at any age. Of course, the earlier the better, but at any age, from adolescence all the way through the early part of college, if we intervened and tried to teach these movements and execute these movements and refine these movements, we were able to create a change, or Logan was able to notice a change in motor skills and in self-confidence and result an increase in physical activity. So it correlates with what I'm seeing in my practice over the years. I really think if we can break the cycle of poor movement, which then leads to no movement, we can change the future of movement and try to get people from being obese, try to prevent people from being couch potatoes and have all these medical problems. If we can prevent these movement issues from happening in the first place. But how do we do that? What does Playtime do, and how does that work? As Michael Jordan said, obstacles don't have to stop you. If you run into a wall, don't turn around and give up. Figure out how to climb it, go through it, or work around it. So Playtime is a way that we can work on trying to figure out how to overcome these obstacles and overcome these barriers by teaching these proprioceptive input in the sense of proprioception to these children and young adults and even adults. We can turn someone who was afraid of being fit or was afraid of being embarrassed or had poor confidence in movement into having more movement successes. The bottom line is we all have movement problems. Nobody's perfect, right? When do we finally get it checked out? Excuse me. When it interferes with how we live and move. So when I lived in Arizona, if someone's knee pain bothered them to the point where they couldn't hike anymore, they came and see me. Here in Ohio, if their knee pain stops them from running, they don't really get all shook up about it. If their knee pain stops them from walking for fitness, that doesn't bring them to me. What brings them to me is when that knee pain prevents them from being able to do their job. That's when they come and see me here in Ohio. So it's really a matter of what's important to that person in their life. What's their priority? When do we finally get something checked out? When it interferes with how we live and move. I think innately, we all know what good movement sort of looks like. We may not know what it feels like, but we can kind of look at it and recognize it. If any of you have your computers in front of you and you can see these two people squatting, we have a young man on the left who is early college and a young lady on the right, who's in junior year in high school. Both are athletes. She plays volleyball. He runs track and does long jump. Both have zero pain problems, zero issues. But which is the better squat? What looks better to you? How do you know? So if you're looking at these two, you can see the gentleman on the left. He's more square, right? Just all around, he's more square. She's less square. So what do I am looking at when I say that? Are the shoulders straight across and square? Yes, in his picture. Hers are a little tipped, right? What are his knees doing? His knees are square over his feet. What are hers doing? They're on the insides of her feet, closer together than her feet are. So in my world of physical therapy, I think, okay, she has the likeliness or the potential to have an injury based on this squat, and he has less potential. So that's what it means to me as a physical therapist. As a coach, as a trainer, these are things that you see, and you're innately thinking this too. But you're trying to train for your skill, whether it's volleyball or football or whatever it is. You're trying to train for your skill. You're not going to take the time to teach this young lady how to squat better, right? Where does she learn this? If she hasn't learned it by the age of 16, 17, where is she going to learn that? Once she gets injured. That's the only time in the medical world is if you go to your doctor and you say, my squat looks funny. My coach told me my squat looks funny. What do I do about it? The doctor's potentially going to say, does it hurt you? No. Then who cares? It's working for you. Let it go. But I believe that we can increase her performance if we can make her squat better. And I think that there's a couple of you on this call that would agree with me. So let's talk about the medical perspective on movement since we're talking about alignment. What factors influence the body and how it works? As physical therapists, we look at the body as a human movement system rather than the human body. So we look at it as a whole system comprising movement-related things. What does that mean? Innately, as humans, we grade our health based on our movement. If we see someone walking across the street very slowly, all hunched over, we think, oh man, this person has a problem. They're not well. They're not doing well. If we see a gray-haired person with a straight spine jogging across the parking lot to make it between two cars, we think, man, that person's doing pretty great. That person's really fit. They're doing really well. So we innately judge our health and our quality of life on movement and whether we can do the things we want to do and need to do. So as physical therapists and looking at the body as a human movement system, we say that the muscles and the bones move us around. So we're in the center of this graph. The nerves tell the muscles what to do and how to move the bones around. In order for those things to happen and for those movements to happen, the pulmonary, cardiovascular, and endocrine systems feed the muscles and bones and help us understand how to function and how to move these things around. And if they can't get those nutrients, the oxygen and all that, then the muscles and bones aren't working well and they're not going to move properly. And the skin holds us all together. So as a human movement system, our muscles and bones move us, nerves tell us what to do, and all the other stuff feeds us and gives us the ability to do those things, and the skin holds us together. Where do these limitations in movement come from? If we can't move, if we're not able to do our human movement system, what's going on? Obviously injury, right? Injury plays into this, of course. If there's an injury, we can't move. If there's a pain problem, we can't move. But is there an issue within the human movement system, within one of those other systems? For example, poor nutrition. I have school nurses and physical education teachers all the time say, these kids eat a bag of flaming Cheetos at lunch and wash it down with a Pepsi. How in the world do they expect to play well at football that night? They're just not getting the right kind of fuel and enough fuel to help their bodies perform. And then in my physical therapy practice, this is the most common. How does tissue breakdown happen without an injury? So how did I just bend over to pick up a tissue and my back blew out? Like, how did that happen? What's going on there? So let's dive into that a little bit. How does a body break down without injury? First of all, it's positioning, right? Posture, as you know, posture means a lot to physical therapists, but also repeated movements that are now muscle memories and how that body moves. Those two things can break a body down without injury. Talking about positioning, if we stay in the same position for too long of a period of time, our body starts to adjust to that position and things can break down. Another example is learning the movement the one way and keeping it through life. So let me give you a real life example. One of my patients was a 28-year-old surgical resident and was having inner knee pain when he was in surgery. He was a runner, didn't have any problems there. He was an intramural basketball player for fun with his friends on the weekends, didn't have any problems there. But he only had pain on this inner knee when he was in surgery. So of course he'd been to the doctor, the MRI is negative, x-rays are negative, doctor's exam is pretty negative, it's tender to touch, but otherwise there's really nothing substantial going on with this knee. And so I did my examination, and of course my exam's negative too. He's a fit, strong, flexible young man. And as we're talking about this, he's standing there talking to me, and he's like, I just get so frustrated because I really can't make it through surgery without knee pain. So I look at him and I say, okay, why are you standing like that? And he said, standing like what? And as I look at him, his one foot is pointed forward like it should be, and his other foot is pointed out to the side, like pretty traumatic, pretty exaggeratedly out to the side. And that was the knee that was hurting him. I said, why are you standing like that? He said, standing like what? I said, look down. He looks at his feet and he goes, I don't know. Isn't this normal? No, it isn't normal. You're supposed to have your feet fairly pointed forward, slightly turned out, both of them, but for the most part, just they're supposed to be pretty symmetrical. And he said, oh, okay. So he fixed his foot and stood there for a minute. And after about a week of doing that in surgery, he didn't have any pain. And I said, why are you standing like that? He said, I really don't know. I said, do you do any board sports? We were in St. Louis at the time. Do you do any board sports? He's like, no. I said, did you do any board sports as a kid? And he said, yeah, I surfed when I was a child and I lived in Hawaii, but we left Hawaii when I was 5. So as it turns out, he learned how to stand like this at a really young age, and that was the habit that he created. In the process of doing that, as he stood like that, and if anybody wants to stand up and try to do that, it makes your knee bend at a really funky angle if you bend forward slightly. And it put all kinds of stress on that ligament on his inner knee called the MCL, and he was creating a mild strain with every standing activity that he did. And all he had to do is turn his foot forward and he was fine. So that's how a body can break down just by positioning it wrong. Posturally, we have similar examples. We can only stay in the same posture for a certain amount of time before our ligaments fail and our intervertebral discs fail. Let's talk about repeated movements. If we do the same thing over and over again, even if it's the right movement and perfectly correct in its mechanics, it can break something down. Just it's doing it too much. Sometimes we learn these movements wrong, like the case of this young man as the surgery resident, and it sticks with us through life. But going back to the same thing over and over again, even if it's correct, the best example I can give you is Little League. Little League has guidelines so that young men and young women that participate in baseball do not hurt their shoulders or elbows or anything like that, because they have to have these guidelines of how often that they can do a pitch or do a throw in an episode. So if you're younger than 14, you're limited to 21 pitches. And if you're 15 to 18, you're limited to 31 pitches per episode. So then you have a day to recover and then you can do it again. But, the issue is so these guidelines are there for Little League, but what about volleyball hitters? What about quarterbacks that throw a ball? Why do we not have these same guidelines for those types of athletes? Another common misconception that I hear in physical therapy practice is, well, my mom had back pain and she had arthritis in her back and knees, so I'm going to have it. Arthritis is genetic. Well, I really think that's a myth, and I think there's going to be a lot more research developing about how that's not true. Of course, if it's systemic arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, or lupus, or some other autoimmune thing, that of course is genetic. But if it's osteoarthritis, where you have to have a knee replacement or what have you, generally that's because of a trauma, a poor length, strength balance, an odd-shaped bone, or whatever contributed to a prolonged faulty movement in that joint. So it generally begins as a joint that moves too much or inappropriately. The body senses it over the course of some years and grows extra bone to help the joint hold still, or in other words, to stabilize the joint. So instead of your muscles and your ligaments stabilizing the joint, the body says, something's wrong here, there's some stress, I'm going to grow some bone to try and hold this together. Because of that, that's how osteoarthritis forms. You grow so much bone that you can no longer hold things together. So I kind of like to say about this, it may not be the genetic portion of your back. You may not have inherited arthritis from your dad or from your mom, but you inherited the shape of your spine from them, and the shape is what is genetic. How you learn to move it is learned. You can fix that. So here's a little cute cartoon. That's what I call a bum knee. So wrapping things up, let's look at things through a PT's view, a body in balance versus a body out of balance. Can anyone, if you have your computer in front of you, can you guess why this guy came to see me? He had some back pain, right? He'd worked in the same job where he bent frequently and lifted frequently throughout the years. And ironically, he either had his phone or his wallet in his back pocket and wore pants that didn't stretch. So he learned how to bend not through his hips, but through his back. Developed arthritis and all kinds of things, could no longer work. What about these two? Who has the stronger abdominals? The kid on the left or the kid on the right? Obviously, the kid on the left is still young, hasn't gone through his growth spurt yet. The kid on the right has. So the kid on the left is stronger abdominals, right? The kid on the right has an arch to his position, and he just hasn't learned how to use his body yet as it grew. Here's that baseball player and the 10-year-old I was telling you about who had sciatic pain for 2 years with radiating symptoms down his leg and needed chiropractic care. His grandma came to me not telling me that he had pain, but telling me that she thought he moved funny. And his argument was he couldn't hit his baseball straight, and it was frustrating for him. Why? Can you see that he's standing there? He's tipped to the left. He has what we call a buckle spot. So his abdominals don't work well, and he has this buckle spot in his spine, which when it happens over and over again, we're compressing tissues and we're creating nerve impingement. This young lady came to see me because her mom had knee problems, and she recognized that her daughter walked just like she did, and she wanted to fix her daughter's problems before they became her mom's problems. So as we're, excuse me, as we're going through things, this poor girl had zero proprioceptive sense. She had no idea what her body was telling her, how to interpret those signals, any of that. So as we're trying to get her glutes to work because her knees were turned in facing one another. Her arches were collapsed, and really all that needed was her glutes to work. The only way we could get her glutes to work, despite exercises and positioning, what have you, and she's 11, was to put a book on her head. As we're putting this book on her head and watching her walk, I'm looking at her neck and I see this bump on her neck. And as she bent forward, the bump got worse, as you can see in the second picture. What is going on here? So this is what medical diagnoses call text neck. So when you're looking down frequently, like at your phone or what have you, you develop this text neck. This young girl hadn't even had a phone yet. Her mom didn't want her having a phone. This is just a learned posture. As I look at her mom and her dad, they stand the same way. So this girl has learned that posture from her parents. Fast forward 20 years, 25 years, and this is a neck picture of someone who was in their 30s and had severe pain in their arms and weakness in their grip and tingling in their fingers. So your neck is supposed to have a position. Whoops, let me back up. Your neck's supposed to have a position that goes the other way, and her neck went forward. So I'm sorry about that. I kind of lost that particular slide, but that's what text neck is when your neck has this forward arch to it as opposed to the backward arch to it. And that will result in nerve pinching and all kinds of stuff. I really think that through playtime, and even if it isn't through playtime, just some other way, learning how to move will promote good movement and performance in life. So this is a 14-year-old basketball player. If you can see where those arrows are pointing, his spine is actually sticking up in those two places. He had sciatica. When you look at this young man, he's in the middle of a growth spurt. From the waist down, he looked like a full-blown man. His legs were muscular, tree trunks, fully hairy, and just big feet and a grown man. You look at him from the waist up and he looks like a 12-year-old boy. He's got a little chest, no real chest hair. His arms are kind of scrawny, his head's small. He just hadn't grown symmetrically. So this poor guy had to modify his movements, and as a result came with these spots in his back. This girl, a couple years older, has gone through her growth spurt, but she has learned this movement pattern poorly with this postural stuff, and she had hip pain. But look at that arch in her back. That was a result of poor movement learned from her parents. So now we have an advanced stage of that. We're a 56-year-old lady that had hip arthritis. And look at her back. It's the same thing. She's not using her body properly and is wearing something out. And these are advanced stages of this, from the 14-year-old boy that's in the middle of a growth spurt to a 16-year-old girl who's done growing to an older lady who has developed this movement pattern and kept it through her whole life. We can intervene and prevent injury and pain. I really think we can. So in these examples, bodies change. They don't grow symmetrically. They grow too fast. We create weird movement patterns that changes movement for a while and sometimes forever, as we've seen in that older lady, and I see that very frequently in my practice. I really think we can intervene because movement is learned. Since movement is learned, we can teach the right way of movement and prevent this wrong way of movement from happening, decreasing injuries and increasing performance. So this mom is teaching this little girl how to ride this bike, right? She's doing an awesome job. And this little girl's learning that from her mom. Wonderful. Thank you, Mom. But look at Mom's bending over. Her knees in funny, her back's weird. And this mom is teaching this girl how to do these things. So this girl is going to learn how to do these things, even though she's not doing it out of necessity, but just doing it out of observation. So the example I like to give here in learning things, even though you don't need it, is my dad has a bad knee from high school. So it was before any of us were around. Because of that, he has a bend to his right side and he limps as he's walking. So if you look at my dad walking next to my two brothers, my brothers have a lean to the right and they also limp as if they've had a knee problem, but they didn't. They learned that walk from my dad because that's how my dad walks. And yet it's not out of necessity for my brothers, but it is out of necessity for my dad. So these things are learned by watching people move, whether it's parents, coaches, what have you, and we can unlearn bad habits at any point. So I think by unlearning those bad habits, we can solve this problem. We need to first do a movement analysis. That's the first step in playtime, is doing a movement analysis. In order to understand what's going on, we have to do that movement analysis. And once we can do the movement analysis, we can quantify what's going on and understand the foundation of where that person's coming from. Once we understand the foundation, then we can fix that movement. So to summarize, we learn fundamental movements early. We reinforce fundamental movements as our bodies change and grow. It gives us movement successes, preventing injuries, giving us more activity, so on and so forth. So if we learn them early, we reinforce these movements and develop the sense of proprioception, we have movement success, which increases movement confidence, creates more activity, prevents injuries, and gives us more physical activity for life. Oh shoot, the meeting just ended. I'm so sorry, guys. I'm not sure what happened there. I guess we are limited to an hour. I did not know that. My apologies. I'll finish presenting here on this. The meeting ended at what was it, 10:30? So that was 1 minute ago. So the slide presentation would be at 54 minutes or 53 minutes when the meeting ended. So I apologize for that. I just started a new meeting if you happen to be able to jump on it. If not, I'll just send an email out and let you know what's going on. We're about finished anyways. Okay, so if we summarize that previous slide, we understand that there's a desire to move innately. And if we can teach body awareness along with that desire to move, giving people movement success, increasing their confidence, we're going to create movers out of non-movers. Bringing us back to the prevention slide of we're going to be more comfortable and confident to take this aspirin for a run, to the gym, for a bike ride. Decreasing health problems while simultaneously increasing fun. Thank you guys so much, and I'm so sorry about that cutoff early. Here is the QR code if you have any more information. There's my website attached to the QR code and my email and phone number if you have any questions. Thank you all so much, and like I said, I will email everyone, and I sincerely apologize. I did not realize that was going to end that quickly. Have a great Saturday morning, y'all.